Marvel may get a lot of credit for dominating Hollywood with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but DC isn't exactly sitting on ass while their live-action films flounder for some footing. DC has a solid stable of video games, mostly off Batman, but still, they have a healthy TV continuity with the Arrowverse. I watch Flash and Legends of Tomorrow religiously. I've heard their streaming shows Doom Patrol, Young Justice, and Titans are excellent, and for the last decade or so, DC has been knocking it out of the park with their animated films. There are a boatload of astounding DC films that I can easily recommend off the top of my head. Batman Under the Red Hood, The Flashpoint Paradox, The New Frontier, Batman vs. Two-Face, Assault on Arkham, Batman vs. the Ninja Turtles, The Dark Knight Returns, Gotham by Gaslight, Justice League, Gods and Monsters, and there are a ton of films that I still need to check out from YouTube or the library. Even DC's more disposable animated films still tend to be fun and entertaining at worst. My all-time favorite film in the franchise is Superman vs. the Elite, a story about examining Superman's wide-eyed idealism in a cynical modern world and reconstructing the importance of a classic superhero as a beacon for humanity. It tends to get dismissed out of hand by fans because it's based on a story that was a giant middle finger to the dark age of comics, and fans like to pretend that we don't need reminders of why a universe of edgelord anti-heroes is a bad idea. Never mind, of course, the wealth of social and political parallels that make the story timeless, and the fact that even without the underlying messages, it's a kick-ass action flick with great drama and characters. God, I love this movie. I would only call a few of the DC animated films outright bombs. Justice League War felt like a boring hour-long fight scene. Batman vs. Robin is one of those infuriating movies that would end in 10 seconds if the characters just talked to each other. And while Batman Gotham Knights animation is drop-dead gorgeous, it just doesn't work as a cohesive movie. But pretty universally hailed as the biggest black eye on DC's animated slate is the 2016 film Batman the Killing Joke, a movie that I've gotten a lot of requests to discuss. Unfortunately, it's hard to discuss the movie without first digging into its source material, so for those of you who aren't nerds or comic book fans, let's begin with a summary of the original comic. Batman the Killing Joke is a one-shot story from 1988 written by legendary comic book author Alan Moore, famous for writing Watchmen, V for Vendetta, and The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and also famous for despising the films based on Watchmen, V for Vendetta, and The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. In the story, the Joker breaks into Commissioner Gordon's house and shoots Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, in the spine, paralyzing her. He then strips her nude, takes photographs of her, and uses the photos to try and torture Commissioner Gordon into insanity. During this whole thing, we get flashbacks telling the Joker's origin story as a failed comedian desperately trying to provide for his pregnant wife. He turns to some criminals, his wife dies, the criminals betray him, he gets framed for a conspiracy, and then he falls into the famous vat of chemicals and goes insane. The Joker believes that the world is such a shithole that going insane is the only way to survive the perpetual trauma, and he's torturing Gordon to prove that anybody can turn out like him after one bad day. It doesn't work, Batman stops the Joker, and he tries to offer rehabilitation so their rivalry can end before one of them dies. Joker declines, and then tells a joke alluding to how hopeless and futile their perpetual conflict is, and they both collapse in helpless laughter at their situation. And some people argue that the Batman strangles the Joker to death off-panel. Killing Joke has remained a fixture of Batman media as basically the definitive Joker character piece, and for contributing to the dark tone that's characterized many Batman works since, but it's also perpetually shackled to controversy because, well, they fridged Batgirl. And yeah, I know that Barbara had quit being Batgirl shortly before Killing Joke was published. That has nothing to do with the argument. A prominent female character and superheroine is crippled for life and sexually assaulted for cheap shock value in a story that has absolutely nothing to do with her. Killing Joke doesn't follow up on Barbara at all after this fairly massive trauma, and the sum total payoff for mutilating a beloved character is to motivate the men in her life for one short story. It's a cheap use of violence against women for cheap drama, and before you jump on me for daring to question the work of Alan Moore, God among nerds, Moore himself regrets crippling Barbara and then doing nothing to explore the character afterwards. A year after Killing Joke was published, Barbara was brought back as the superhero computer hacker Oracle, but that wasn't the plan when Barbara was crippled. The writers of Suicide Squad at the time went rogue to bring Barbara back on their own because they were mortified that DC had thrown her out like trash on a whim. According to my research, Killing Joke wasn't even supposed to be canon when it was written. It was declared canon after the fact. Probably has something to do with the legend that when Alan Moore asked DC if it was okay to injure Barbara, he got a post-it note reading, and this is the full quote, "Cripple the bitch." So even though Killing Joke has endured as an iconic character piece, it's also endured as an icon of the misogyny that's plagued the industry for years. Not helping matters is that writers keep referencing Killing Joke when they don't know what to do with Barbara as a character, which happens a lot. Writers don't tend to research characters they don't write regularly. So this dark blot on DC keeps getting dredged back up in Barbara's life to the point some people, wrong people, try to argue that Killing Joke is a Batgirl story. Nevertheless, Killing Joke still stands as a deeply influential Batman story, and its DNA has been worked into several Batman stories since. Killing Joke was fused with The Long Halloween to create The Dark Knight. The bulk of that film is Joker acting out his anybody-can-turn-out-like-me mentality on a citywide scale. He tries, successfully this time, to turn one of Batman's allies crazy with one bad day, but he's ultimately proven wrong like he was in the original novel.
So ordinary people don't crack. Maybe it's just you.
What were you trying to prove? That deep down, everyone's as ugly as you. You're alone.
Arkham Origins has a Killing Joke monologue establishing the Joker's philosophy of using insanity to escape trauma. Joker torturing one of Batman's allies into being like him is taken more literally in Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. The also influential A Serious House on Serious Earth plays around with Killing Joke's two insane people trying to reach each other ending. Hell, the cartoon series The Batman did a really damn good Killing Joke story for its first season finale. Joker kidnaps, traumatizes, and inadvertently mutates prominent support character Ethan Bennett into becoming the series' first Clayface, complete with references to One Bad Day.
You know what separates the freaks from the normals? Just one rotten day. Ever had a really rotten day, Batman?
And those are just the examples that I can think of off the top of my head. Point is, Killing Joke's themes and ideas have been expanded into so many Batman stories since its publication that giving the original a dedicated adaptation is kind of pointless at this stage. The original story isn't much more than one long monologue and some flashbacks, and everything Killing Joke did apart from Joker's origin has been redone in more complex stories since. The children's cartoon proved you can do this story without the shock content and the dark tone. Shit, the pendulum has swung to where Batman stories that are light and fun are the refreshing change of pace now. Not to be a jerk here, but nobody was asking for a Killing Joke movie. Well, nobody except for Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill is the iconic voice of the Joker dating back to Batman the Animated Series, and back when he ostensibly retired the character after Batman Arkham City, he announced that he'd return if they did a Killing Joke movie. Mark Hamill is the iconic Joker, and he really wanted to sink his teeth into the iconic Joker story. Hence, the Killing Joke animated movie. So here's the big question. How in the hell was a short story about the Joker giving a long-ass speech expanded into a 77-minute film? Simple. They tacked a 28-minute prologue onto the front of it.
I realize this is probably not how you thought the story would start.
The film opens with Batgirl and Batman tracking a villain invented for the movie named Paris Franz. And yes, even the movie mocks how stupid his name is.
His name is Paris. Paris Franz.
You're kidding.
To be fair, Paris initially seems like he could be a fun villain. He's cool in a crisis, he's got decent quips, and he's looking to take over a mob by modernizing it with cybercrime. But then he gets a look at Batgirl during a car chase, and he spends the rest of his screen time desperately trying to bang Batgirl until it becomes his only character trait. He even pays a hooker to wear a Batgirl mask. He starts out fun and turns into a cringy joke. Batgirl is overpowered by Paris in a fight and easily lured into multiple traps, only surviving because she's repeatedly rescued by Batman. In between these scenes, Barbara has chats with the most cliché token gay best friend in history about how she really wants to date Batman, but she can't get him to notice her.
And you're into him because...
Because of the yoga. I like the yoga.
Batman pulls Barbara off the Paris case and gives a speech about darkness that's trying so hard to be edgy that it'd make Hunt Down the Freeman jealous.
You're not in it like I am, Barbara. You haven't been taken to the edge yet. The abyss. The place where you don't care anymore. Where all hope dies.
Batgirl gets mad and wrestles Batman to the ground, and then they have sex. Yeah, we'll circle back to it. Batman shuns Batgirl after their horizontal tango, which causes her to have repeated violent outbursts. When they finally track Paris down, Batgirl beats him within an inch of his life while shouting, "You ruined everything!"
You ruined everything!
Paris is caught, and Barbara decides to retire being Batgirl because of the abyss and crap. And then, with a shift in tone and writing so massive you feel like they cut over to a completely different movie, they cut ahead several months, and the actual retelling of Killing Joke begins.
Hello. I want to talk.
So, a straight white man will now try to talk about a female superhero's portrayal without embarrassing himself. The problem with this prologue is not that Batman and Batgirl have sex, even though everything connected to that scene is so cringe-inducing that I'm worried my head will straight up swallow my own eyeballs. The problem is that the entire prologue is a full-blown character assassination of Batgirl. The prologue establishes repeatedly that this Batgirl only fights crime because she wants to get Batman's attention romantically. When she beats Paris to near death, it plays like it's over him screwing up her shot with Batman, and when she quits being Batgirl because she was pushed to the edge and almost went off the deep end, it plays more like she quit because Batman rejected her. Hell, immediately before she quits being Batgirl, it focuses on her staring forlornly at a happy couple, emphasizing her concern for a relationship over anything having to do with the abyss and shit. She's dumb, she's hot-headed, she's easily manipulated, she gets overpowered and outsmarted by a joke villain multiple times, she has no self-control whatsoever, and she's only in it for the sex. The hell kind of a superhero is this? A fan of this movie argued to me on Twitter that the movie has carte blanche to do whatever it wants with Batgirl because adaptations are allowed to diverge from the source material. Let's set aside how that's a straw man's argument that could apply to any garbage fire adaptation with no regard to its quality, from Galacticloud to Ukog to Dude Peel to all of that. This is still a horrible character without taking connection to the source material into account. That same viewer later came back to me with the defense, well, they gave Barbara more characterization, they made her a flawed character and more complex, and that's good. It's the same defense that I hear for Metroid Other M, and I have the same response. Adding characterization is not automatically a good thing, not when you just dump and dogpile negative traits onto the character until there's nothing likable left. You can add flaws to a character, but there's a right and a wrong way to do it. The show Elementary's take on Sherlock Holmes turned him into a very serious recovering drug addict, struggling to stay sober and shunning everyone in his orbit to protect them from his self-loathing, self-destructive behavior. But Sherlock struggled constantly with his demons to become a better person and was humanized and compelling because of it.
Committed to my recovery, and now, 2 years in, is this it? My sobriety is simply a grind. It's just this leaky faucet which requires constant maintenance, and in return offers only not to drip.
The mere existence of flaws does not make a character interesting. Elementary Sherlock knows that he has flaws and gets good character development over his fight to overcome them, while other M. Samus and Killing Joke Batgirl don't realize they have flaws, period, so they stagnate, and Barbara just quits. But it's not just that the adaptation is wildly off base with her characterization. Literally the only character trait or aspect of her personality the movie cares about is her sex life. There are a boatload of shots objectifying her and focusing on her ass, and again, her entire motivation for everything she does boils down to pining for a boyfriend. Boiling Barbara's character down to just a sex life and repeatedly objectifying her as the lead into a story where she's sexually humiliated and discarded as a cheap plot device really doesn't help the misogynistic vibes of the material. And let's not forget how the prologue craps on Batman while we're at it. The dude's so sleazy he apparently doesn't have any hesitation boning his best friend's daughter, somewhat his own surrogate daughter, and woman about half his age. Man's a genius billionaire playboy philanthropist and he really has to crap where he eats to get laid, and he doesn't even have the spine to speak to her. Oh, poor choice of words. Killing Joke was controversial for mutilating Batgirl in a story that had absolutely nothing to do with her, and they tried to course correct by throwing in this prologue to reframe Killing Joke as a Batgirl story, but she still gets maimed for no reason but to motivate the male characters. They still don't explore her development after being attacked, and she still has absolutely nothing to do with the story past the half-hour mark. All they did was make the character's treatment worse by taking a huge dump on her in her prime. The film's writer justified the prologue by saying, well, the material was controversial already, so why not add more controversy? Backing up the immature feel of the writing by deflecting criticism with, you mad, bro? Except, I don't buy that already lame excuse. The movie was produced by a lot of the same crew as Batman the Animated Series, and someone in that entourage, more than likely Bruce Timm, has been obsessed with shipping Batman and Batgirl for years. It started with a dream sequence in Batman the Animated Series where the two hook up on patrol.
Barbara! Hey, Babs!
What is it, Dick?
Then years later in Batman Beyond, they established that Bruce and Barbara hooked up and it didn't end well.
Dick finally got fed up living in Batman's shadow. He was hurt when I chose to stay behind with Bruce.
As his partner? His girlfriend? Whoa.
Then still more years later, the Batman Beyond comics had flashbacks where Bruce got Barbara pregnant while she was dating Nightwing, and then Barbara got assaulted and had a miscarriage. And you thought J.K. Rowling had problems crapping all over her material after the fact? And now that we're working with an R rating, the obsession has hit its climax of just having them bone on screen. They had a decent idea going on with this prologue. Open up with a short story of Batgirl being pushed to her breaking point just before a story where Batman does the same, but between the immature writing shallowly going on about sex and Bruce Timm jumping at the chance to have Batman and Batgirl bang, nothing in this prologue plays out the way it should. The end result is just embarrassing and stupid. The remainder of the Killing Joke movie is a fairly direct translation of the original comic, only with voice acting from Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy. There really is something brilliant about the writing of Alan Moore in his prime, and Mark Hamill's one-man show acting out these lines is something that fans can get a lot out of.
Memories can be vile, repulsive, little Bruce. Like children, no? But can we live without them? Memories are what our reason is based on. If we deny them, we deny reason itself. So when you find yourself locked onto an unpleasant train of thought, headed for places in your past where the screaming is unavoidable, remember this: there's always madness.
Okay, even if you don't care about Batgirl's portrayal or don't want to get into a debate about sexism, can we at least agree how disrespectful and stupid it is that this emotional, poetic, brilliantly acted character piece has half an hour of horny morons dribbling on about sex and a villain named Paris Franz belted onto the front of it? That's not courting controversy, that's just shitty writing. It's embarrassing that they thought this...
The abyss. The place where you don't care anymore. Where all hope dies.
...was in any way in league with this!
I went crazy, and I'm smart enough to admit it. Why can't you? Silly goose, it's all a joke. Everything anybody's ever valued or struggled for. Why can't you see the funny side? Why aren't you laughing?
Also, the Joker has a musical number that Mark Hamill knocks out of the park that keeps the story from being too overwhelmingly dark.
When the world is full of care, and every headline screams despair, when all is rape, starvation, war, and life is vile, I go loony as a light bulb battered bug, simply loony, sometimes fold and chew the rug.
The original story is padded a little to fill time, with Batman working the streets looking for leads, a kangaroo court scene where the Joker points out that on strict technicality of the law, he and Batman aren't that different, and unlike the comic where Joker's carnival sideshow goons are smart and run away from a pissed-off Batman, here they have some fight scenes added for the less devoted fans to enjoy it as an actual movie. The story is paced fine enough, and the brief additions and filler don't clash with the original material, and the music is pretty good. The biggest issue on the technical side is parts of the film very noticeably have lower frame rates than they should, and the animation can be a little jittery. I'm not a die-hard fan of the comic, so I'm not the guy to nitpick over all the artistic or stylistic changes. I know someone got mad that they threw one of Joker's monologues in with a fight scene. Killing Joke's art style is a fiercely debated topic since an anniversary re-release replaced the neon-soaked fever dream colors with a typical modern gritty aesthetic. I'm not into debating stuff like that. I will say Batman's cowl looks like complete crap, though. I think it's the ears awkwardly sticking off to the sides like they're just tacked on. Oh, and don't think I didn't notice you snuck the Batman the Animated Series Batmobile in there. I see it! How dare you! There are a few noteworthy changes from the comic that are worth mentioning, though. They added a gratuitous scene of Barbara in gym clothes stretching while the camera focuses on her ample ass. God, they did such right by this character! They went out of their way to add a line of dialogue all but stating that Barbara was raped by the Joker, even though Alan Moore has always vehemently denied that Barb was raped in the original comic.
Nope. Which is funny.
Yeah, he usually comes around here right away.
So why do you think he hasn't been to visit?
I don't know. Maybe he found himself another girl.
And while the Joker's flashbacks are mostly well done, they seriously botch the scene where Joker finds out that his wife died. He finds out off-screen, and it loses the bulk of its impact. And near as I can tell, they did this so that you would have foreshadowing that the criminals are evil. Literally a minute before the criminals turn out to be evil. Batman straight up throws one of the Joker's goons into a spiked pit where they clearly die off-screen. So this entire story is about a crisis point over how Batman can't kill the Joker no matter how far he's pushed, but he'll axe off midget henchmen without hesitation. I'm also not sure how I feel about the mid-credits stinger where Barbara returns home now in a wheelchair, but super upbeat and her life back on track like the preceding hour never even happened, even partaking in sports and already become Oracle to continue superheroing. It's rather patronizing about how easy it is to recover from life-changing injuries, sexual assault, and the mountain of trauma associated with it, and it's another jarring tonal change, but it is, admittedly, a nice uplifting note after a dark, depressing story, and a good message about moving on after a tragedy. It's a mixed bag, like the movie itself. I hate it when people describe an adaptation as being for the fans, because 90% of the time anymore it just means I will not hear a bad word said about my niche franchise. But Killing Joke does kind of feel like a for the fans movie. If you're a fan of Mark Hamill's Joker or a fan of the Killing Joke comic, then the movie might be worth renting for a stellar one-man show performance. That said, any viewing of this movie should entail fast-forwarding past the first 28 minutes. But Killing Joke's ideas have been done in more complete stories elsewhere, and apart from Joker's origin, which is buried in a lot of icky things, I don't know what it has to offer non-fans. It's not worthless, but it's not good either, and it's still a definite blot on DC's otherwise excellent animated slate. I always suck at coming up with conclusions to these videos, so I'll just sign off with a fitting clip from a much better Batman movie.
Hello, Batgirl. Love your boots.
Smile.